As you can see, I already have Linux Mint installed on my system. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll be installing Linux Mint in a virtual machine. So here's the wizard for VMware Workstation Player. I have already selected the ISO file. You don't need to do any of this if you actually are going to install Linux Mint. All you have to do is boot into the live USB like I said before. Then Linux kernel of Linux Mint is 5.4, so and it's a 64-bit kernel, so I selected this. Next, and I'll just name it Linux Mint. Mint. Alright, you can also choose the location of the VM virtual machine if you want. Next, I'm going to split the virtual disk into multiple files, and I'm going to assign 20 GBs to the virtual machine. So the virtual machine will have about 20 GBs of a hard disk. So I'll just click the next button, and if you want you can also customize the hardware. I'm going to set the RAM to about 2 GB and processors as 1. Everything else seems to be okay. I'll close it and click on finish. This will automatically power on the virtual machine. Okay, now it should find the ISO file. So when you boot into the live USB, if you've been using the live USB, you should see a menu somewhat like this, uh, with various options. You have to click on Start Linux Mint and select Start Linux Mint and press the enter key. That should start up the live USB. What is important to understand here at this point is that the operating system has not been installed into the system. It is simply running on the USB, that is via the USB. To actually install it, there's an installer included inside the live USB, which I'll be running. Linux Mint has started up. What you have to do is click on the install Linux Mint icon and click on install Linux Mint. That will bring up the Ubiquiti installer for Linux Mint right here. Here you can see that it is asking the language you want for the installation process, so I'm just going to select English. Before I do that, I want to make sure that you're connected to the internet. All right, continue. Okay, so the keyboard layout, I'm just going to keep the default, that is English US. However, if you want to change it, you can easily from here. You can also test the keyboard layout here. Then here, install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware, flash, MP3 and other media. This is mandatory if you are going to be playing a lot of media which is third-party, and you have external hardware that require separate drivers that are not by default included into the operating system. So I'm just going to click on the install button and I'm going to click on continue. Okay, now there are two ways you can install Linux Mint on your system. That is two basic ways. The first one that you see here is erase disk and install Linux Mint. This will essentially erase entire your entire hard drive and remove all the files. If your Windows installed, it will be wiped out too, and essentially what will remain will be a clean disk. So unless you want to do a clean install of Linux Mint, that is completely remove all operating systems and data and restart over, I won't recommend this option. You can click on something else. Now most of the process when you select this option is basically automatic. However, if you want your system to be a bit differently configured, or if you're dual booting your system, that is having Linux Mint and another operating system like Windows installed simultaneously, then you can click on the something else option. Next you can continue. Since the disk of this virtual machine is completely clean, there's no partition tables, so I'll have to create a new partition table. A partition table is basically, your hard disk will be separated into different virtual partitions. You can store different type of data on different partitions, and different partitions can have different file systems. So here you get a warning prompt. I'm just going to continue. Okay, so we have free space amounting to this size. You click so the first thing that I'll be doing is creating the root directory. The root directory is basically where all the system files and applications that you download will be stored. So maybe you should ensure that it has a little more space. So I'm just going to give it about 10 GBs. And the file system, you can choose whatever file system you want, but if you don't know what a file system is, or it's too complicated for you to understand, then just select the default, that is the ext4 journaling file system. Then you can select the mount point. This is basically where the partition that you're creating will be mounted when you power on the operating system. So the mount point is the root directory, this. Alright, so after checking everything, you can click on the OK button. So a partition has been created. You can now click on the free space, then click the plus icon again, and say I'm giving it 9 GB. Now the next virtual partition that I'm going to be creating will be the home partition. This is where your documents, files, and images, media, whatever will be stored. So that is the home, that is the mount point. Alright, so I'll click OK. Next, this step is completely optional. You can select a swap partition. What a swap partition does is, when your RAM gets full and your system is very old and it is struggling, a lot of programs occupy the RAM and it is completely full, so what the system will do is store some of programs that are running onto the swap directory. The swap directory is very slow in processing data. It is not as fast as the RAM is, so the performance will be slower, but it can save old systems with like 1 GB or 2 GB of RAM from simultaneous or spontaneously crashing. So if you want to set a swap directory, just click on, I'm going to use all the space, so the plus icon and whatever space is remaining, and the mount point, we'll just use it as swap area right there. Click on OK. Alright, if you have 32 or 64 GB of RAM, a swap isn't really necessary because mostly the programs won't exceed 32 or 64 GB RAM sizes. So, but in case you want to keep it, you can keep it up to 1 GB or 500 MBs, whatever you prefer. Okay, everything is ready, so I'm going to install Linux Mint now. Here you'll see a warning: whatever changes you have made will be made permanent if you continue, but however, if you're not sure, you can revisit whatever you've changed and reconfigure it and then proceed. But since I've already configured everything and everything has been configured correctly, I'm going to continue. This may take some time. Alright, we can now select the region we're at. So since the IST time zone is common for the entire country, I'm going to just select Kolkata and continue. Now here you'll have to create a user for accessing the operating system. I'll just enter username, mint user. Right, you can name the PC what I want. I'm just leaving it to the default. Username, mint user. Choose a password. I'll just choose a password. Alright. This encrypt my home folder is a good setting to enable if the only operating system you have on your PC is Linux. Mint. So what it does is it encrypts your home directory with your password, so nobody can access it, even if they completely delete the boot records and externally try to access it without starting or logging into the operating system. But if you have an operating system in dual boot mode, that is multi boot mode, that is 2 or 3 operating systems on the same machine, and you want to access the disk or partition of Linux Mint from the other operating system, then I won't recommend enabling this option. I'm not going to encrypt my home folder. Then you should select require my password to log in, because logging in automatically is a security risk. And continue. Alright, the installation has begun and now it is copying files. Till then, there's this slideshow that you can go through. Linux Mint has Firefox pre-installed. Then it also has Rhythmbox pre-installed. You can install Spotify if you want, and it also comes with Cellulite, and you can install third-party extensions, and a lot of drawing and media software comes with that, like Pix and Drawing. GIMP can be installed. Also, Inkscape can be installed later. All these apps can be installed on Linux Mint. And of course, Linux Mint comes with its own suite of its own office suite, that is the LibreOffice, essentially a good alternative to Microsoft Office. It also has these extra utilities that you can install. Basically, it has a lot of uh, packages available. Mostly whatever is available for Ubuntu is naturally available for Linux Mint 19.3, because it is based on Ubuntu. Of course, you can install these if you want to run Windows on Linux in containerized environment, you can run using a virtual box, or like me, you can use a VMware workstation. And of course, there's a lot of tools to customize the desktop. Like I have customized the icons, even the look and feel of the entire desktop environment. You can customize a lot. Now this installation process will take a lot of time, or depending upon your operating system, depending upon your PC's hardware performance. You can also, it has Linux Mint as an update manager. If you just click here on the system tray, you'll find the update manager. It helps you keep packages up to date. Of course, Linux Mint is a very popular distribution, so it has a lot of community support, and you'll find a lot of guides, tutorials, forums all over the internet. Okay, now I'm just going to skip to the end of this installation. After the installation is complete, you should see a dialog somewhat like this, which gives you the option to either continue testing the live USB or boot into the Linux Mint operating system, which has now been installed into your PC. So if you want to boot into Linux Mint, you can click on Restart Now. One more thing to note is that if you already have Windows or any other operating system installed alongside Linux Mint in UEFI mode, then you should see a Linux Mint dialog while starting, which will prompt you to select an operating system to boot into. Select Linux Mint.